I haven't really been to the Northeast other than New York City, if that counts, and Pittsburgh. So I wanted to hit some bookstores and graves up there. So I'm going to go chronologically here of all the book related stuff. I'll leave all the other stuff out. The first place I drugged my family to was Rhode Island to visit H.P. Lovecraft's grave just on the outskirts of Providence. We arrived, and I'm telling you, it's a beautiful, beautiful cemetery. His grave was really cool because fans have staked pencils into the ground around his grave marker. And if you check Facebook and X, and then also YouTube, I'm going to have photos plus a slideshow on YouTube of everything we're talking about today on places I went. So be sure to check that out. I have photos on the Paperback Warrior page showing me standing at the grave of H.P. Lovecraft. But from there, we went south, we parked, and then we ferried over to a place called Block Island. The second day of the vacation, I went to the island-bound bookstore, and I can only guess like the rent for this place has to be like super, super expensive. But it was a cute little place, but nothing for folks like us, like literally nothing. Just new books with some reprints of mysteries and classics, but Block Island itself is absolutely gorgeous, and I recommend it as a trip for anyone. It's a beautiful place to be. The next day, we went to the legendary Salem, Massachusetts, and I found a bookstore in Salem called Pyramid Books. And I went into Pyramid Books, and I immediately left. Not really, I guess you could call it a bookstore, but it's just new age stuff, mysticism stuff, magnets, postcards, trinkets, some books, but it totally didn't interest me at all, so I just left. The next day, we did some Massachusetts stuff, and that led me to one of the most unique bookstores I've ever been to. The place is called the Montague Book Mill. This store is 2 levels, and it's literally sitting on the Sawmill River, which is fed by the larger Connecticut River. People were cozily inside reading, studying, and man, the atmosphere was just so nice. They had the windows open and you had the sound of the roaring water. It was just really refreshing. It's kind of like an outdoorsy feel, but inside. However, not much happening in the way of our kind of books, like nothing. I'm starting to see the pattern, and that's that New England is really big on nonfiction books, and their stores are just packed with that kind of stuff. I'm mostly not interested in anything of that genre, except, as you probably guessed, books about books. I love books about books. Or music, too. I could do either one, but I did locate 2 interesting books there that might appeal to some of you. There were 2 Ace books on the shelf. This is part of a science fiction trilogy starring an astronaut and I guess pilot named Nicole Shea. The 2 books were First Flight from 1987 and Grounded from 1991. They look really cool, and both were authored by iconic X-Men and comic scribe Chris Claremont. They also had a Lancer paperback there by Ted White called Phoenix Prime, which had a publishing date of 1966, and I didn't write it down, but the store also had an issue of an old science fiction pulp, but I can't think of the name, and I forgot to take a picture of it. Next, after that bookstore, we continued to travel north up into Vermont, and we traveled to a place called Brattleboro, and it's a weird place. Like, it's a really weird place. And we only stopped there because on the map, it's like literally the only city that we came to after driving like 25 miles into Vermont. That was the first place that popped up. So we stopped there. I had looked and saw that there was a couple of bookstores there, so I was happy to stop in, but I don't know if anyone has been to Brattleboro, but it's a weird place. I just didn't get a good vibe when I was there, and you kind of pull in and there's all this political stuff, like all of their agendas and their opinions, and which is fine, but I mean, it is everywhere and it's overdone, and there were a couple people tweaking on drugs there on the sidewalk. And keep in mind, I've got my wife and I've got 3 kids with us, and it wasn't a great place to be, but I wanted to just check out the bookstores real fast and then get the heck out of there. So the first bookstore that I came to, which had good reviews online, was Brattleboro Books. But it just happened to be that they were closed that day, so no luck there. It looked great. The next best place for books was across the street, and it was called Everyone's Books. Really weird that they're like staring at each other on the street. It's kind of odd. Maybe they're rivals of some kind, but the best used bookstores are sometimes in bad areas. So I was kind of hopeful that if I walked in there, I would find some good stuff. I didn't feel great in the doorway of this place, and they had a sign up stating that masks were recommended. And I haven't put a mask on, in a store like that since like summer of 2020. So it was weird for me, but I was okay with it. I mean, that's what they want to do. So I went over, asked if they had any mask, and the guy kind of unfriendly just pointed to some on the counter, and he had like little specific instructions on where to place this little baggie once you are opening your mask and put it on. They have specific instructions that they want the little baggie in this little container. Weird place, and it was tombstone cold, like tombstone cold in there. They had nothing of interest other than just a lot of books that were, it looked like they were like specifically organized by whatever political thing they were trying to emphasize. Anyway, the store, not good. Maybe someone out there has a better experience with them, but mine was just awful. But thankfully, the trip to Brattleboro was saved by Twice Upon a Time Antiques. This store is massive. It's huge. It has 2 levels. And I took some photos of the books in there, and I've added them to the slideshow and some of my photos. Normally, antique stores aren't good, and we've talked about that before on this very podcast. Antique stores are great places to hoard cookbooks, and that's normally all they have is cookbooks. But this place was surprisingly a little different. First thing I saw was a bagged original hardcover of a vintage Hardy Boys book. This one was called The Secret Warning. I used to love Hardy Boys when I was growing up. It was $20. I didn't need it. I passed. They had a Dorothy Sayers Avon paperback called Lord Peter Views the Body. They had hardcover vintage westerns by William McLeod Rain and B.M. Bauer. These were tagged for $5 each. There was a neat-looking vintage hardcover by Fran Stryker called The Hidden Stone Mystery, which I think is an installment in the Tom Quest Adventures series. It was $5. They also had some of Fran Stryker's Lone Ranger novels in there as well. Browsing a little bit more, I found some Fawcett Gold medals. I found science fiction paperbacks published by the likes of Ace and Signet. I mean, they had some great stuff, like stuff by John D. MacDonald, Andre Norton. I can't never remember the actual name, but Andre Norton. Robert Silverberg. They had a Berkeley Medallion sci-fi paperback that looked pretty cool. It was called No Man on Earth. And they also had a Curtis Books paperback by Joe Poyer. And I can't think of the name of it. Maybe that was the same book. I can't make sense of my own notes. But they also had The Guns of Terra 10 by the Executioner creator, writer Don Pendleton. That's got a cool cover. I see it out and about every now and then. I saw a cool Ace book, F353, if you're keeping track at home. This was Avron Davidson's Rogue Dragon. Also, they had a really cool collection of audio CDs. Remember CDs? Remember CDs? I'm so old now that CDs are outdated. But they had a collection of those. I counted 12 Perry Mason audio CDs. They had a couple of the Ellery Queen CDs, and they also had a Sherlock Holmes and a Max Allan Collins CD in there as well. I've got photos of all of them. And I ended up just buying one thing, even though I saw a lot of cool stuff. I just bought one thing, which was really just a stack of Marvel's Red Sonja comics. This was the 1983 series, which I didn't have, and I was able to get issues number 2 through 12, which is cool because there was only 13 issues total, so I got almost the majority of the series. I spent some money there, though. It cost me $35 to get that whole stack, but money well spent. The next day, we went to Boston. I hit a bookstore there called Books and Old Prints. And you can find the store at commonwealthbooks.com. Inside the store, I talked to the owner, and he told me the store has been around for about 30 years or so. I mentioned that I had a Paperback Warrior podcast and blog where I did book reviews and shout outs to bookstores, and he didn't seem to care. So, nice guy, but he wasn't interested in talking that particular day. So I moved into the shelving area, and they had a hard case crime paperback by Donald E. Westlake. They had an Ed McBain 87th Precinct paperback, and they also had a collection that I don't know why I didn't buy it. I wish I had. It was a hardcover by Arthur Morrison collecting the best Martin Hewitt detective stories. I don't know why I didn't buy it. They had a robust collection of doll books, including the Gore series. They had in a glass case a vintage paperback by Dornford Yates called Shoalwater, and they also had a Barbara Michaels hardcover called The Dance on the Other Side. Took photos of all this as well. I only bought one book, and surprisingly, it wasn't even in the store. It was in a cart shoved outside, advertised as $1 a book. So I went out there, picked up a book called The Whisper of Shadows by J.L.H. Whitney. J.L.H. Whitney. I'm not sure who that is. But yeah, Whisper of Shadows. It's an Ace Gothic from 1964. While I was in Boston, I also checked out a popular chain store that I've never visited called Newberry Comics. Maybe some of you out there already have Newberry Comics stores in your area, but hey, this was the first time I'd ever been there. They have a really large two-story Newberry Comics located in the Quincy Market area. And that was a lot of fun, just browsing comics and their trade collections. They had cool vintage, or I shouldn't say vintage, but cool 80s themed horror t-shirts and rock t-shirts and things like that. Cool place. I didn't buy anything. The next day, I dragged my family along for a long drive through western Connecticut. I mean, we drove and drove and drove into some pretty darn rural areas. I mean, we were almost over into New York at this point, but we went to a place called Washington, Connecticut, for one specific reason, and that was to visit Edward S. Aaron's grave. Edward S. Aaron's, he's buried in Old Judea Cemetery, and I have a photo of me standing by his grave, and I'll post that as well. You know, it's kind of funny because when you get to these, authors that you love and that you read and that you adore, it's kind of a sad scenario when you go and visit their grave and then you just realize that it's just a grave. Nothing there to indicate that they were a great writer, that they had this excellent bibliography, that they had fans, that some of these authors, like Edward S. Aarons, for example, had great contributions to crime noir, crime fiction in general, spy fiction. Remember, Aarons wrote the Assignment series, also known as Sam Durrell, and there's nothing there to suggest that he was a great writer. And I was driving there and I'm thinking to myself, there's got probably like some pencils staked out. Maybe somebody has left something on his grave. Kind of like what they did with H.P. Lovecraft, but there's nothing. His grave is marked with a military designation because he was in the U.S. Coast Guard. In fact, he was at Pearl Harbor when it was bombed. So they had the military designation there, so that was cool. But nothing else to celebrate. Arguably one of my favorite crime fiction writers, but arguably one of the most popular crime noir writers of the mid-20th century anyway, or early 20th century. And when you think about it, Aarons, he was published by the likes of Graphic, Ace. He was published by, obviously, Fawcett Gold Medal. And then he always had great artists doing his covers, so he was a big deal, and his books had multiple printings for a number of decades. But anyway, I felt really bad when I was visiting his grave, but I took some time to kind of give my spill on how great he was as a writer and what great books that he wrote. So I kind of told him that, and then I left. The same day, we drove to Yale to visit one of the largest buildings in the world housing rare books. It's called the Benecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. Hope I'm saying that name right. Benecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. It's a huge indoor rectangular glass tower stacked with rare books. Above ground, this thing is 6 stories high and has something like 200,000 books in its tower. And then I'm not sure if they have 1 million books in the underground facility or just room for 1 million. But when you walk in there, there's staircases on each side that you walk up just to view the tower. And all the books are in a controlled room, and I'm sure they probably have some sort of air treatment inside. There's also guards there that keep you from, going nuts and trying to break through and getting an expensive, valuable book. It took me about 20 minutes to slowly walk completely around the tower. It was a cool experience. I'm glad I went. I posted photos as well of that. I also went to Yale's historic Sterling Memorial Library, which was amazing, just as amazing. There they have a lot of old books as well, which I think are borrowed from the Benecke Rare Book Library. I saw a Moby Dick book in there in a case, and it was printed by Chicago's Lakeside Press with illustrations by Rockwell, and it was dated 1930. So anyway, I texted my dad right after I left there, and I told him I made it to Yale, and it didn't cost him a penny. It was also in the Yale area that I found the absolute best bookstore that I visited the whole trip. The store is called Gray Matter Books. I walked in, and it seemed kind of small, but I didn't realize how deep the store was. On the first shelf I touched, I found a surplus of Lawrence Block paperbacks, both from Avon and Signet. I found Assault on Lovelace by Alan Caillou, which was an installment in his Cabo Cain series. I found Return of the Saint on Coronet, and the title was The Saint and the Habsburg Necklace. I found a cool book by Paul Thurdo called Saint Jack, which was later adapted into a film and had a great cover. The store also had a copy of the High Adventure magazine. This one sported a story called Arms for Ethiopia by George Fielding Eliot. There was a vintage Signet paperback by Kingsley Amis called Take a Girl Like You. Looked awesome. I didn't buy that one because it had a little bit of a higher price tag, so I passed on it. Another vintage paperback I saw there had an up-close view of a woman's torso and her clothed nether regions called The Talking Jewels by Dennis Diderot. I found a Bantam paperback by Frederick Brown called The Mind Thing. It was a good selection of books. Their sci-fi section was really good. I took a photo of one of their large bookshelves with 3 tiers, and the pricing here was pretty affordable. Most of the paperbacks were between $1 and $4, so to make up for my lack of purchases for the week, I decided to buy a stack of books here. So here's what I bought, and forgive me, I haven't had time to research any of these authors or titles yet, so I might be mentioning a pseudonym or something like that. But the first ones I wanted to mention were the sleaze books. The sleaze books I bought were All the Way, written by Michael Avallone using the name Mike. It's a Midwood paperback from 1960. I paid $3. Whistle Them Willing by Richard Geiss. This is a Playtime book from 1964. It was in really great shape. I did pay a little bit more for this one. I've got $6 written down, but I don't remember it being that high. But maybe I paid $6 for it. Make It on Temple Street by Opal Lee Berryman on Newsstand Library. They were a popular publisher that produced sleaze-looking books, which we'll get into a little bit later, but that one was from 1961. I paid $4. Another Newsstand Library book called Sex is Like Money by T.A. Maschke from 1931, $4. Another Newsstand Library book called Satan's Mate by G.H. Smith from 1960. I chose to start reading this book at the airport, and I finished it, so I'm going to review this book on this episode. And I found a crime fiction book called The Cleanup by Joe Barry on Handy Books, a publisher we discussed a few weeks ago. And that one was from 1947, and I paid $3 for it. The science fiction genre, I picked up Killer Pine by Lindsay Gutteridge, which was on Panther Books from 1973. This is part of the Ace Micro Agent series. It's an installment in that title. I think I paid $3. October the 1st is Too Late by Fred Hoyle. That's a Fawcett Gold Medal book. 1970, I paid $1.50. Survival World by Frank Belknap Long on Magnum. 1971, $1.50. And then in the adventure section, The Beach of Falaise by Dylan Thomas on Ballantine Books in 1965, $2. The Lost Europeans has a great cover by Emmanuel Livanov on Pyramid, 1959, $3. And White Eagles Over Serbia by Lawrence Durrell on Avon Camelot from 1957. The Avon Camelot, I do believe, is their young adult series. So we'll check that out. And the last day of the vacation, I went to Manhattan. I tried my luck one more time at a store called Bookoff. It's Bookoff, Bookoff. Used bookstore in Midtown East. Nice place, 2 floors. They sell tons of toys, manga, DVDs, records, books, that kind of thing. It reminded me of a Second and Charles store. And they buy huge lots of discontinued modern hardcovers and trades, and they sell them for about $3 to $7 each. I mean, if you want new books at a cheaper price, and I'm talking about like your airport books, the ones that have the same font on every cover, this is probably the place to go to get those. I didn't see anything I needed, so I just bailed out really quick, and that was it. There you have it. A week of New England and New York City book shopping. We hope you enjoyed this visual feature from Paperback Warrior, your premier source for reviews, articles, commentary, and artwork on vintage paperbacks and pulp magazines. Subscribe to our channel for new features, podcast episodes, and special presentations of paperback collections, shopping trips, and conventions. Our blog at paperbackwarrior.com hosts over 1,000 reviews, and you can listen to over 100 podcast episodes that provide introspective, deep dives into the illustrious world of vintage paperback reading and collecting. Delve, discover, explore, and read these vintage novels. They are true time capsules showcasing a historic portion of the past.